Well, we've come to the end of Season 2 of BCG on Compliance, and there's a lot to digest. For the past couple of months, we've talked to the developers of several GenAI tools that aim to make compliance processes faster, more accurate, and help us outpace increasingly savvy criminals. But with any tool, it's never that simple. And we decided to do another episode just to sort through all the layers. So today, I'm getting into the guest chair, and BCG's Debora de Cuyper will grill me on my Season 2 takeaways.
I'm so glad I can turn the tables and interview you to really kind of get your insights and reflections and also look beyond the tools.
Debora is a partner in BCG's financial institutions practice. Working with global banks, she specializes in driving large-scale change programs. She's also deeply affiliated with BCG's risk and compliance practice, supporting chief risk and compliance officers in reviewing their operating models as they meet critical risk and compliance challenges. There's no better person to help me get to the bottom of compliance AI tools and figure out where we are now and where we're going. This is BCG on Compliance, a podcast that explores today's most pressing criminal trends and how compliance professionals are adapting to stay ahead of that curve. I'm Hanjo.
I really like the saying that the value of AI is probably overstated in the short term, but understated in the long term. And the potential is there. I'm personally very convinced of that.
That's Quintex's Parsa Ghaffari, my guest on episode 2 this season. And his favorite saying is exactly the right way to kick off our season wrap-up. Debora and I are going to try to dissect what we learned from all these vendors, cut through the noise, and get to the reality around AI tools for compliance. So, let's get to it.
Hey, Hanjo. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. So, in the past season, we have spoken to Tedare, Contexa, Hawk AI, and Pega on their tools and trends ahead. We had some incredible guests and discussions. What would you say are your kind of general takeaways about the potential, but also the limitations of AI in compliance?
Great way to start the discussion, Debora, and very excited to have you on the show as well. 4 things that I take away from the past discussions. Number 1, there's a lot of stuff happening on AI, machine learning, Gen AI. I mean, throw all the buzzwords out. And I think there's a general call for action for anyone in compliance or even outside of compliance to get acquainted with those technologies, because the market is moving fast and not knowing what is happening in that space is a missed opportunity. I'm not saying that every solution is something that every bank or every company should be having, but being aware of what the market offers and being aware of what the technologies are doing, I think is something that everyone needs to get behind. Point 2, I think another observation I and we had through the course of this season is there's a lot of good solutions out there in the market. I think for compliance professionals, the big question will be, how do they work together? How do I stitch all of the different solutions together to have a well-running ecosystem that supports my target operating model? So meaning the processes, and how do I connect tool A and tool B, which both standalone might be great tools, but connectivity is a very important point. So my point number 2. Point number 3, a tool can help you in a lot of things, but it doesn't take the pressure or the requirement away from you as a compliance professional to understand and define your target operating model. Where do you want to be as a function in, say, 3 or 5 years' time? Where should the company overall be in 3 to 5 years' time? And how can you as compliance support them? And then tools can support you in doing this, but don't look at vendors for the answer. The call for action is on you as a compliance professional to define how you want to run the shop and how you want to quote unquote future-proof the function and the way how you operate for the next couple of years. And my 4th and last reflection is that criminals are using the technology as well, and actually at much more scale very often than organizations that we see. And criminals operate almost without boundaries, whereas in a lot of the organizations, or hopefully in all of the organizations, we have some sort of governance, we have departments, we have model validation, we have controls, and they are there for a good reason. But I think two questions that one needs to ask oneself is one, are fraudsters and criminals outpacing me on innovation right now? And second, how can I adjust the governance and model validation to a point where I'm still getting as an organization the effectiveness, but I am not losing on the speed of innovation? Because I cannot afford building a model now with Gen AI and other things, but then going through a 12 to 14 month validation cycle, because by the time that model has been approved, it's already outdated. So what's the new approach? And I think the industry doesn't have an answer yet to bringing in the innovation, reducing the time to market, but at the same time, remaining effective from a risk modeling and governance perspective.
Those are some great takeaways, Hanjo. I know you spoke with several cutting edge providers, but no tool can kind of solve all those problems, right? And as we heard, the application may depend as well on the AI maturity of the company. Where do you then see those software solutions that we discussed in the season? Like, where do those apply best?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is doing a project with us. I'm kidding. But the challenge that we now see is indeed, as you say, Debora, that there is no single solution provider out there that solves it all. I mean, compliance is a super wide topic in itself. If you just take one of the examples, which we've also majored on, anti-financial crime compliance, this is already a very big topic, right? So in my view, the way to solve it is to look at what do I need from a functional perspective in order to, quote unquote, solve the topic in terms of the controls in place, the business processes adjusted, risk management effectiveness, etc. Then from those requirements, what are my capabilities? So what are the technology solutions that I need here and there in order to support me? And then translating the capability map into an IT or software and application architecture. Concretely speaking, what is needed? I think there's a plethora of solutions needed, but they need to work in sync. To me, there's a couple of what I would call vertical solutions, like a solution for transaction monitoring, a solution for sanction screening and embargo screening, a solution for KYC and onboarding, a solution for client risk rating, and many, many more. And then there's a couple of horizontal capabilities, if you will, like a workflow orchestration system that supports connecting cases, regardless of where they come from, for the investigators to connect the intelligence on clients across all the different detection mechanisms. But the same thing holds true in market conduct, to have vertical detection tools and a multitude of models to detect market abuse. And then on the other hand, a workflow that connects all of this, the intelligence on what are my traders, what are my brokers, what are other people with direct market access doing, rather than to have individual solutions that investigate those cases in isolation and therefore don't bring all the intelligence together. So it's a multi-capability play. It's a usually multi-vendor play. And the other part I want to highlight is very often it is a play that starts with, based on the business requirement, is that more a capability that I should develop in-house? Or is that something where a vendor has a unique proposition that I should buy in the market?
So you're highlighting a variety of tools and vendors. And do we build in-house? Do we actually go to a vendor? This leads me a bit to a common question from our client. Like, where do we start? I know we heard in some of the previous episodes, like the journey starts most of the time with kind of having good data and experimenting. In your view, like what should firms really do to get started on this journey?
I think really to start with a very high level exercise, if you haven't done that already, on what I would call the target operating model, but really an assessment on where do I stand as a function. So compliance as a function, but also compliance as a theme, because compliance affects everyone, not only the people in compliance. So where do I stand today? Where does the market stand? And very important in the space, where's the market evolving to? And then from that deriving, how do I want the future to look like? How do I best support the business? And that whole discussion needs to be also embedded in the discussion of the overall company strategy, where this is where I stand today, this is where I think the market is evolving, this is where I want to be, where I need to be in order to be effective or remain effective. Then to derive, what is it that I need to show? And then derive the capabilities. And capabilities can also entail data acquisition capabilities, data trace and triaging capabilities, data cleansing capabilities, etc. But I'm a very big fan of laying out that very comprehensive, call it 360 view of the world, that strategy first, and then see what data do I actually need the most? How do I best remediate that? There's not that many data items that you will need to do effective compliance. So what are those that you then can remediate? And looking at the data strategy, the data acquisition and cleansing strategy, hand in hand with the tooling strategy, what detection tools or what analytic tools do I have to then actually take the data, build my models for usually it is detection, and create insights from that. And one doesn't go without the other. Tobias Schweiger, the co-founder and CEO of Hawk, was featured in episode 4 of season 2. It was great to hear that he also has a very strategic perspective on the fine balance required for implementing these tools.
I think the slightly more conservative answer is not to jump to conclusions too quickly in terms of just put in a new tech, but instead, of course, start to map the risk appetite of the bank when it comes to anti-financial crime controls, correctly onto new technology. So really go through the process of doing that instead of just RFPing for a new solution.
I love the way you kind of challenged the guest on that, right? You challenged the guest that AI is not the only solution. You were very happy that they also didn't state that. It's not the only solution to really increase effectiveness and efficiency to combat financial crime. And you highlighted kind of operating model. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of what you mean with operating model and a process review to kind of enable those tools to be more effective?
Absolutely. And before I do that, let me call out, I'm not a critic to AI or Gen AI or innovation per se, right? I'm a big fan of understanding the matter and then thinking really smartly about where can I actually use it? Where does it make sense? What I'm not a fan of is the buzzwording where now everyone tells me everything is now fully AI. And that to me does not work. Now, coming to your question, if I take, for example, transaction monitoring as a end-to-end process where compliance does acquire data, feeds it into detection models, gets signals or alerts out, depending on how you call it, and then starts processing these alerts in a workflow with humans in various different levels, say level 1, level 2, or maybe level 3, up to filing SR or STR, depending on the jurisdiction. Now, if you take that process as an end-to-end process, and you start with a target operating model, which is a framework in an end, starting with things like, what is my overall strategy and risk appetite? What I mean with that is, how do I think of the implication of potentially having transacted funds for money laundering purposes from clients or terrorist financing purposes or other predicate offenses? So that part. Governance, like who is involved? Who actually does acquire the data? Who actually is responsible to remediate the data if we see there's data missing or there are issues in the data? Who runs the transaction monitoring tool? Who provides the methodology of what needs to go into the tool? Is there an operations team that actually does the handling of all the alerts? So there's a multitude of functions or sub-functions and teams involved in that. And do they actually work in sync? And then we come to the methodology and reporting requirements. So a lot of different things. And my view of target operating model and the review of that process front to back is to go through all these categories and say, what is it really, starting with a strategy that we want to achieve? How do we assure effectiveness of that, i.e., how do I have at least a certain amount of certainty that I do detect the things I need to detect? And once I can establish and evidence effectiveness, how do I ensure this process is efficient? And thirdly, how do I increase the quote-unquote user experience? So defining all of these things to be much more consistent and much more front to back in the planning, I think that is for me the first thing that needs to happen. And that's the thing that doesn't need to mention AI or Gen AI in a word. And it's the thing you could have done, you should have done 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So it is, yes, the quote unquote boring old things that never dry out in a way. What we now have compared to 20 years ago is a plethora of new tools that we can use to help solve the question. But raising the question, structuring the question is still the old legacy job we need to do. So my big point is we shouldn't just throw Gen AI as a buzzword onto problems that are very classical methodology, process, people, or governance problems, but solve them in the way they should be solved, and then acknowledge Gen AI, advanced analytics, RPA, whatever you have for what they're worth, and use them where they actually make an impact.
I think that resonates a lot. It's kind of don't automate a process that is broken either. Taking us back to kind of the first episodes of the season, you kicked off the season with Yaron Hazan of TEDARA, who really advocates for Gen AI to outpace complex financial crimes, but also really having that strong collaboration between private companies and law enforcement.
The industry needs tools that will help detect simple and complex schemes in a timely manner. With using AI, it will shorten the time it takes, one, to detect and identify suspicious patterns by the private sector. Second, if detected by the private sector, by the financial service providers, financial institutions, etc., to report it in a timely manner. But the loop should be closed also by law enforcement agencies and the FIUs in the world to act upon it. Because today, one of the challenges is that even when a bank identifies, let's say, a suspicious pattern or suspicious group of activists, until it's been acted upon by the FIUs, it takes too long.
I'd love to hear your view on that. Like, how can we bring that more strong collaboration forward?
Excellent. Now you're asking me the tricky question, because I would say on Yaron's comment, I fully agree. The game changer would be better collaboration between private companies and law enforcement. I think he didn't really say how to do it. So the how is the tricky part, which I would fully agree, right? If I'm looking at the organized crime, drug cartels, criminal gangs, criminal networks, human trafficking networks, you name it. Those are highly, quote unquote, professional organizations. And they are usually, from what I've learned, very hierarchically driven, which can be good, can be bad. But for the purpose of bringing in innovation quickly, making changes, they're usually much, much faster in the way how they're set up and the way how they're run compared to the big financial services institutions. So yes, they can use innovation to really outpace the controls that banks can put in, and thereby innovating financial crime and the crime typologies much faster than the banks can follow. And we can just take what Gen AI has done to fraud and scams and some cyber attacks and these kind of things, right? Where the old rules don't apply anymore. And I think we've all seen them, right? The phishing training on, oh, is there an email that creates urgency, is written in bad language, has typos in there? I mean, these large language models make fewer mistakes than any one of us would do in those emails, right? So I think we need to retrain ourselves on this, but criminals are using that at scale in various places already. So I think why you would need better collaboration between private companies and law enforcement is pretty evident. And law enforcement has much more opportunities or much more room to maneuver compared to the very regulated private companies. But I think to start pooling the information and also providing feedback from the law enforcement. I mean, banks are submitting, depending on the size, probably something between a couple of thousands to a couple of 100,000 suspicious transaction reports or suspicious activity reports to authorities every year. The question is, how much feedback do they get on all this volume that they're sending to authorities? From what I hear, very minimal. So starting this dialogue on pooling data, potentially even building models, detection models that build networks across the whole industry. Question on, are you only including the quote-unquote classical banks, or are you also including all the PSPs, money service providers, all the new digital channels, the non-fiat money exchanges, etc., but basically all the channels on which I as a fraudster would be evading to circumvent the fiat money system, and then getting the feedback in from authorities. And that's not only law enforcement, but regulators, supervisors, yes, law enforcement as well, intelligence services, to have a better picture of what are these networks doing? Where do they operate? How do they operate? Who are new gang members entering? And how do I surveil those? And what information do I actually give banks in order to surveil those people and the funds and the accounts they have? And last but not least, and I think this is the holy grail, and I'd be super happy if I see this in my lifetime happening, but authorities across different jurisdictions collaborating. Because what we're also seeing a lot is criminal organizations are abusing trade-offs or intransparency between jurisdictions. If I take some tax paradises, if I'm taking offshore islands, if I'm taking, you name it, it's very hard for a lot of the authorities to enforce and even surveil outside of the perimeter of the own jurisdiction. And obviously, this is not news to criminals. So how do you collaborate as an industry? Big topic. Most of the approaches I've seen thus far have usually lacked from commitment from one side or either of the two sides. The sharing models, how do you clear potential conflicts with data sharing, with privacy information? Because we also need to remember probably 99% of the customers are quote unquote good customers, right? Who just want to have a bank account, who just want to transfer money, who send money abroad for their kids to study. It's about the 1% or whatever that number is of criminals that you want to capture. Now, does that justify sharing data from all your customers because you have an obligation to detect that 1% of suspicious and criminal activity?
As you're stating, it really stuck with me that it's not only the good guys using Gen AI and that criminals are also using it. It feels like we're in a race, and it's very unsettling. How do, next to that collaboration element, how do financial institutions stay ahead of those criminal activities, especially if we see some controls getting outdated?
Two things. I think one is by following this rigor and this approach we just outlined. And I think thinking about your target operating model is a constant thing. And I could compare it with any professional sport. I think there you're also always, even if you're at the top of the league, you're also challenging yourself. Who are the new talents? What do I need to do? How do I change the system? How do I innovate? Because once you're the leader in that sport, say football, people will prepare especially for you, right? They will tune their roster to beat you. So you'll still need to be on top. You're at chronic unease, I think is what you say, right? So I think a similar concept is here. Just because you've defined your target operating model a year ago doesn't mean you're exempt. So constantly to think about, what is the innovation? How do I bring graduates, new talents in? How do I have people who've basically been acting as ethical hackers since they're like 10 years old or something, graduated from engineering schools? How do I bring these people in? How do I bring psychologists in? How do I bring just diverse people in to think about all the blind spots? And how do I innovate my system? You always need to innovate and then think about kind of what's the most efficient way to do that innovation. And that's why I think it's so important to be early on in the discussion, to also join industry fora, conferences, discussions with supervisors, authorities, etc., just trying to stay ahead of the curve. I think that's the big point there. The other part I think one needs to acknowledge, you can only do so much. And I think there's a key point to showing the governance, showing the organizational capabilities you have, showing the reporting, the evidencing, etc. And then you still need to acknowledge that bad things can still happen. There's nothing that prevents that. Even if you spend 100% of your earnings on compliance, bad things can still happen. The big question then is, how quickly are you identifying those things? How quickly are you remediating those things? And the combination of the two, you having the right things in place as an organization and being able to detect and remediate on time and at quality, that hopefully should keep you out of trouble. But it's not that you can solve the criminal problem. It's existed for multiple thousand years, right? I mean, the underlying concept is super old. What does innovate all the time is the way in how you do it and how complex you make it, and therefore how hard you make it to unwind it. But that's where I think I would invest in trying to get capabilities to unwind complexity and therefore enable you as a human being to see or turn the data into insights and really see what's happening and then take informed decisions based on that.
Looking forward, Hanjo, and getting to a so what for our listeners here, what do you think the guest perspectives taught us about the trends in the space and what our clients can do to prepare for those now?
So certainly there's a lot of excitement from all the discussions we've had in that season on innovation in technology, innovation in using data at scale, AI, so classical and predictive AI, as well as generative AI. Again, I wouldn't disagree with that. I do think there's a lot to be gained. What I would say as a reminder is think about how this really makes sense in light of your organization, the culture of your organization, the people and their skills, as well as the processes, so the operating model as well, that you run. I do think there's great innovation there. I think that getting better capabilities of scaling up, I think that's for me probably the single most exciting trend. Because we've heard for over a decade supervisors saying risk-based approach and compliance. Now, I've not found a single professional who've solved what that really means. Because people are still very nervous on, yes, okay, regulation calls for risk-based approach. Supervision still happens on that, that single transaction that you missed to monitor 5 years ago. So how does that then work together? I think a good way out on this is to really have data-driven approaches at scale so that you're getting smarter about what is in your portfolio. You risk tier that. So in that sense, you could say, I've looked at everything, but where I'm focusing my time and my money and my resources, that's on the higher risk cases, the higher risk transactions. But rather than randomly selecting those and therefore always being nervous on, what have I not selected? What is my blind spot? Having a much more informed view about the whole portfolio and the ones that you have not prioritized versus the ones that you have prioritized, and then being able to evidence, I have not looked at this transaction because of these reasons. Now, 5 years into the future, these reasons might actually not have come true, but I've made the analysis and I have documented the rationale for why we have not or only looked 10 minutes at this case versus why we spent 3 hours on this other case. So I think how you can then turn everything more into a much more data-driven and tech-enabled organization, and thereby also shifting the skills and the people and the team mix and composition, that to me is one thing that I'm very excited about for the next 2 to 3 years to come.
That's great. I love to close this episode with 2 questions that I'm very curious about. One is, did any guest or topic challenge your existing views or assumptions?
It would be arrogant to say they didn't, right? So I think they certainly broadened my horizon, and I would say they confirmed a lot of the views I had. I think, same as you were stating before, what I find very fascinating is the people that operated on both sides, the authority side and now the private market side, and the stories or the experiences that they can share around what criminals actually do and how they behave. And this can be from the psychology angle, from the understanding criminal organizations, or having seen the data analytics that some of the intelligence services are using and the insights that they have on criminal networks. And we had discussions with Yaron, who were, in my view, super exciting on what he's seen in his various roles. We've had the discussion with Tobias from Hawk AI on what they're doing with some of their clients in this regard. So I think there's a lot of those cases out, which I would say not necessarily challenged my existing view, but broadened my horizon on various aspects.
And definitely the quote will also stay with me, is that Gen AI will be overstating Gen AI in the short term, but really underestimating what it can do in the long term. I think that's also a big quote I'm taking away.
Absolutely.
When it comes to Gen AI and AML risk compliance, what questions remain unanswered for you?
A lot of them. I would almost say that we probably, as a society, haven't understood the full potential of Gen AI yet. So I think we're just at the beginning of that journey. To be a bit more precise or give you a different perspective, I think one of the things that currently is not answered yet is, You can use Gen AI in a lot of areas for AML, right? File creation in KYC, alert file creation, and writing the narrative. To what extent across the globe, rather than individual regions, but across the globe, are supervisors and investigative authorities accepting the use of Gen AI in this space versus, oh, you can use it, but I still want a human to look and pass every single passage of the dossier or the alert handling file that you have. So really, what's the full potential in terms of bottom line impact that Gen AI can have versus where will regulation restrict the use of Gen AI in certain areas? And this doesn't have to be a bad thing, but then what is the evolution path of this? And are even supervisors using or starting to use Gen AI, right? If you look at the FIUs in the different countries, they get those 100,000s or 10,000s of alerts or STRs and SARs from the institutions. Are they then using Gen AI to analyze unstructured data? Are they using or will they be using Gen AI for creating their dossiers that they might pass on to enforcement? But is the industry working together on better understanding both the upsides and the downsides of it? And I think it has upsides, right? Like more consistency, better transparency. The way how the tool works is much more consistent than an investigator, and you have 500 of those. Like investigator 1 versus investigator 2 is operating. Or, and we saw even the difference in how the same investigator decided on a Monday morning versus a Friday evening. Now that is black box, right? Because yes, you can survey that person, but looking into that person's brain, very difficult. Now, looking into quote unquote the brain of a model, if you build it right, much easier. So the big question to me is, how will both the public and the private side continue to employ Gen AI? And what's the bottom line impact that Gen AI can have to these activities that we've been discussing?
Thank you so much, Hanjo, for your insights and perspectives as we're wrapping up the season. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
And thank you, Debora, for hosting the show today. That was Debora de Cuyper, partner in BCG's Financial Institutions Practice, and my special guest host today. What takeaways did you have from this season? And what other topics would you like us to tackle in the future? Join the conversation by connecting with us on your podcast app, writing a review of the show, or emailing us at bcgoncompliance@bcg.com. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our incredible guests coming up in Season 3. You can look for that starting in January. I'm Hanjo Seibert. Thanks for listening.